Hi guys, how you doing today? This is Shawn Bean, and we'll be discussing a lot of information on thyroid. I hope I'm doing this right. Um, so, as of now, I believe I'm live. So, I welcome your questions, and hopefully we can see how they're doing. So, let's begin. Okay, the first question that we have is, all right, the first question we have is, Shawn, have you seen a connection between 3-3 and frequency ADH? As of now, there's no scientific documentation where there is any issues with ADH in reference to this information. What I can tell you is that the kidneys are a major component to T4, T3 conversion. A lot of people think it's the liver, and it's really not. So, in working with the thyroid, a lot of people focus on the conversion happening in the liver, but actually, peripherally, it happens a lot within the kidneys because of the fact is a lot of diabetics and stuff have reverse T3 issues. And we sometimes wonder, does the diabetes come from the hypothyroidism itself because of the dysregulation of the insulin? Because there are studies showing that how thyroid does control dysregulation of the insulin itself. So please let me know this is coming up because I'm trying to track questions for everyone. So this is my first time doing this live. So can everybody see me? All right, there we go. Steve, do you have any questions you want to ask? Okay, great. This is much easier to see the rolling questions. Perfect. All right, good. So, what are some of the questions that you guys want to ask? Yeah, I responded to the ADH question, being that there is a connection between the kidneys as well in the thyroid T4 T3 conversion. Sometimes addressing the kidneys will actually address proper T4 T3 conversion. A lot of people don't know that. So that's one area that it may be associated with. Also, hypothyroidism is also associated with sometimes the inability to sleep, which may cause a lot of issues with possible increased urination just from not being able to sleep properly. Low ADH, the best thing you do with low ADH is you gotta address the underlying cause of why it's happening. Vasopressin is one of those things that it's really a hit or miss. Sometimes it works great, sometimes it doesn't work. I know a couple Lyme doctors that used it. It worked good for the first couple months, and then it had negative effects on the heart, and they're very hesitant about using it from now on because they had some very close calls with it. Antidiuretic hormone is a big issue in Lyme mold and any other illness. Normally, when you see low ADH, the practitioner should think Lyme or mold in the first place. It's actually one of the triggers that I use. Okay. What is the lowest TH indicative of? The lower the TSH, it's basically indicating that the body senses that it has enough thyroid. Um, Whenever you're looking at thyroid levels, a lot of the practitioners are looking at the TSH as the gold standard, which is not true. And especially if you have Hashimoto's or anything like that are autoimmune disorders, you want that TSH actually suppressed. Um, a lot of people that have the a lot of people that have the TSH that has Hashimoto's, a lot of their endocrinologists are going by, oh, you're going to go hypothyroid. That's not true. I just had a case of a lady that the practitioner she was working with wouldn't push her thyroid below the TSH suppressed level, and she had Hashimoto's. So I found a way to tweak it so that I was able to get the TSH down. Her TSH was 2.1 and her symptoms were still present. Once I got her TSH suppressed under, totally suppressed at 0.001, her thyroid symptoms went completely away. She was diagnosed with Lyme previously, and a lot of her symptoms were not Lyme, but actually thyroid. Once we corrected the thyroid, the Lyme symptoms actually got better. So I told her that there's no need chasing that rabbit down the hole because of the fact it would only lead into a whole area of unnecessary antibiotics. So that was one prime example of pushing the TSH incredibly low in order to get a clinical response. And her endocrinologist would not give her more medications, so unfortunately we had to do our own thing. And there are things that can be done. Some of the glandulars out there work extremely well. Ecothyroid is one of them. Ecothyroid is my go-to. Normally, and you see a glandular roughly on a therapeutic dose, it's usually about half of what it says it is. So if you're getting 125 milligrams, expect the clinical response about roughly roughly about half a grain. Okay. So if you're getting, hypothetically, let me rephrase that. If you're using Ecothyroid 125, it's equivalent to about 1 grain of actual clinical response on the thyroid. So if you use some of the glandulars, you'll actually start to see the TSH get suppressed because it's making the thyroid work more effectively. So that's a wonderful thing that you can use in replace if your endocrinologist is not being cooperative and following the guidelines. And again, it's really not their fault because that's what the system's trained on. So in order to break the mold, you got to work with open-minded endocrinologists, and you're not going to ever change the system. You have to change the mindset within the system in order to get a clinical response and to change the way people think about things. One of the things that I find in not just UK but also Canada, Australia, and a lot of the other countries is that endocrinology is one of their weaker areas, and it's one of those really black and white areas, especially people that have Addison's. Two of my friends over in UK have Addison's. I caught it many years ago, and they didn't know what to do about it. So eventually it got to the point to where they almost had to end up dying to get the proper treatment. And now they're on high doses of prednisone, and they're basically been debilitating life. And they were both major, athletes who were the epitome of health at one time. So, moving on through. Posting question on behalf of another. I have subclinical thyroid and my GP won't treat symptomatically. He won't do it. TSH was 0.004. I'm 3.79. Okay. First of all, let me give you my criteria for TSH. Okay. TSH is not the gold standard, but it's typically the gold standard in endocrinology. Okay. TSH I like to see between around 1 to 1.5. When it gets above 1.5, I'm going to start to look at The free T3 levels, always look at free T3, free T4, but you want to be, females want to be a little bit above the mid-range, meaning if you're on thyroid meds and your range goes from 2.3 to 4.1, you want to be around 3.3. Females tend to be better at a higher level than males do. Males tend to be more operating around 2.9 to 3.1 area because we don't need as much thyroid as females do. I don't know why, but it's just a clinical observation that I've made. Your free T3, free T4 should be about equal. So whenever there's a deviation from T4 to T3, there's a conversion issue, and you have to look at the underlying pathology, the history, the minerals, the vitamins, cofactors, and so forth to find out why that's not happening. One of the biggest questions we're probably going to get asked is what does the T4 T3 conversion, why does that we see T4 T3 conversion? Number one, cortisol. Number two, insulin. Adrenaline can cause it. You got heavy metals. You've got zinc. You got a zinc deficiency. You got selenium deficiency. Iodine deficiencies in there. Manganese deficiencies in there. So again, you see that the cofactors, which are the minerals, and a lot of people that I get from UK and around the world, their doctors don't focus on that. And that's one of the areas that, as a clinical nutritionist, we focus on. Because if you don't have the right cofactors, your enzymes aren't going to work, plain and simple. So that's why I use the Biolabs has a plasma. They have a plasma mineral test that I do with a combination of red blood cell, and that works incredibly well. It gives you a good indication of what's possibly going on. A lot of people with viruses and stuff are zinc deficient. Sometimes the viruses will use the zinc. There's theories on that, but there's no actually scientific evidence based upon that. But a lot of times one of the markers I look for to find out if people have Lyme is I look at their low zinc levels. Zinc is also associated with endocrine system. It's almost like food for pituitary gland. Basically, if you're zinc deficient, your thyroid's not going to work. If you're zinc deficient, male's testosterone level's not going to work. If you're zinc deficient, progesterone's not going to be functioning. If you're zinc deficient, RT3 can be a problem, selenium deficiency, so forth. So again, minerals and cofactors are huge in the identification of the T4 T3 conversion. Other factors that can affect it would be heavy metals. Mercury has affinity for selenium. Environmental toxins, estrogens. There's, again, on T4 T3, you've got primary, you've got secondary and tertiary hypothyroidism, mitochondrial. The analogy I use when dealing with these issues is you basically have you basically have a well, a bucket, and a pump, okay? The well fills, sometimes the body produces the thyroid and eventually goes into the well. The problem is often sometimes the well is full and your pump's broken, okay? And sometimes you might have soot from the underground stream going into the well, and that soot could be reverse T3, all right? So a lot of times the representation is the pituitary gland would be what generates the T4 T3. But then once the T4 T3 gets moving, it goes into the well, okay, which would be an indication of the blood. Then once you have the pump will be indication of cortisol and potential ferritin, because if the body doesn't have enough cortisol, what happens is it gets stuck. And this is often when you see that low T4, high T3 that aren't being supplemented. This is called it's pulling in the system, all right? And what you need to do is sometimes fixing the adrenal glands will actually make the TSH drop. And that would what we call secondary hypothyroidism due to adrenal insufficiency. So if you look on your thyroid meds, if you're taking thyroid meds, it always tells you to address and identify adrenal insufficiency first, or cortisol deficiency, before administering thyroid meds. But unfortunately, that does not happen. And the criteria based upon traditional endocrinology is you either have Addison's or Cushing's. There's no in between. So what we do as practitioners is we look at the gray areas. And often, sometimes, if a person has a high TSH, they have low adrenal glands. Fix the adrenal glands, puts the thyroid back online. Sometimes you have to do it the opposite way. Sometimes the thyroid may be lagging, which is stressing the adrenal glands. And the way you want to measure the way you want to look at this is imagine a train going up a hill. You have an engine in the front, an engine in the back. The engine in the front is the thyroid, engine in the back is the adrenal glands. Okay? If the engine in the front goes down, the engine in the back has to push harder to get it up the hill. But sometimes you push it up the hill and eventually you start sliding backwards. So if you give a little support for the adrenals, it keeps it going. But technically, if you start the front engine, it reduces the stress off the back engine to take a break. So there's always a breaking and stopping. There's always like a yin and yang when it comes to adrenals and thyroid, because this is why I like to use the Dutch test. The Dutch test actually does an incredible job of showing you how your cellular thyroid is doing. And normally you'll see people that have super high cortisol levels in their saliva or in their urine, and they're just saying, oh, it's due to high cortisol. That's not necessarily true, because you need thyroid to actually burn off the cortisol levels. So if you see on a Dutch test, you see super high cortisol levels, but then you see your free levels incredibly high, but your total levels metabolized are very low in comparison to it. That's because the thyroid's not working right, and it indicates that there's a cellular thyroid deficiency going on. So you have to look at the reason of why that's happening, and sometimes in that case, addressing the thyroid would probably resolve the cortisol issue itself. So what appears to be actually cortisol level could actually be a thyroid problem in disguise. So you have to work with your practitioner and have a better understanding and help educate them in these type of things, because a lot of practitioners don't know that. I pointed out to a practitioner last night, and he's like, this is like a gold mine, because this way you can actually identify you can actually identify how to address the problem. And I actually had a case to where I saw this information. I told the person to say, hey, your doctor needs to up your thyroid a bit, and the doctors hadn't seen the test yet. So when the person did the precision hormone test, she walked in and she goes, yeah, I spoke to Shawn. He said that my thyroid needs to be adjusted a little bit higher. And the doctor gave her a dirty look, like, how do you know? Well, it was already in the laboratory testing. And what happens is the problem with medicine is not the testing, it's the interpretation of the results that becomes the problem. And we practitioners have to educate ourselves to better understand the interpretations, because I can pick up Lyme in a precision hormone test. I can pick up Lyme in an organic acid test. I can pick up Babs in an organic acid test. But you have to learn how to know how to interpret the results and to cross-reference it. It's great to be able to find this information out, and what it does is it will cause people to stand up and begin to be their own advocate. Just knowing what's wrong with a person is one of the areas to where they start healing. So one of the questions I often get about reverse T3. All right, here's my thing about reverse T3. Reverse T3 is a mechanism that prevents the body from burning itself up. All right, it's basically like going out to your car. It's basically like getting, when you get ready for work in the morning, go out to your garage if you have one. If you don't have one, we're going to have one. But what happens is reverse T3 is like when you give T3 in certain situations, it's kind of like going out to your car and starting it up in the garage and not putting the garage door up, and you end up smothering yourself. So the reverse T3 is actually a protective mechanism to the body to slow down because it wants to heal. But unfortunately, many practitioners are giving high dosages of RT3 to overcome thyroid resistance. The problem is thyroid resistance is usually due to mitochondrial dysfunction. It's usually due to receptor issues, which could be progesterone, estrogen. By correcting the progesterone estrogen balances, you get the thyroid moving right. By working on the heavy metals, if they have heavy metals, that will cause a disruption of the receptor. So sometimes it's just not in the blood, okay? And when you're looking, traditional endocrinology looks at the blood. They're not looking at functionality. From an alternative standpoint, an integrative standpoint, we look at functionality because you could have beautiful labs in your blood, but you have totally hyperthyroid symptoms. So you have to look at the underlying pathologies to say, hey doc, my TSH is 2, but my free T3 and free T4 are on the mid-normal range. And sometimes you may have to address the thyroid, give them a little bit of thyroid support, and they feel better, okay? Sometimes people that have gut problems, you can do all you want for the gut, but if you don't fix the thyroid, it's not going to work because the thyroid and the gut have a direct interrelationship, okay? Because if your thyroid's down, guess what? Your gut motility's down. If your gut motility's down, what's happening is the food that's supposed to be moving through, you're going to end up with what we call a slight case of gastroparesis, to where you're going to get slow gastric dumping. And what's going to happen is, by the food not moving through, it's going to become a feeding ground for the bacteria. So by addressing the thyroid, you can actually help gut dysbiosis because of proper moving of the food to where it doesn't become used against you as fuel for the bacteria. And that's happened many times too, is you get a case that has SIBO or bacterial overgrowth and you fix the thyroid. All of a sudden their SIBO gets better or their dysbiosis gets better. Also, thyroid is necessary for secretion of pancreatic enzymes and also your stomach acids. So if you have low thyroid, you better be supporting your hydrochloric acids, your digestive enzymes, until you get the thyroid up and moving. Sometimes I support the enzyme system in the GI tract, and once I get the thyroid going, I can back them off, and I can remove the digestive enzyme, the hydrochloric acid, because the body's doing it on its own. Sometimes people are zinc deficient. Well, guess what? I found studies showing that zinc deficiency is actually from subclinical hypothyroidism, because you need thyroid in order to make the zinc metabolize properly to uptake it up into the red blood cell. So correcting the thyroid can actually increase a person's zinc level at the cellular level because of specific mechanisms that are starting to be known. So sometimes if you're nutritionally deficient, it may not be because you're not taking it. It may be because there's a cellular metabolism. Because thyroid, a lot of times people will correct thyroid, guess what happens? Magnesium comes up. Okay? The thyroid has a direct interconnection between mitochondria and methylation. And those all three go hand in hand. So if you correct methylation, you may be able to get people off thyroids. I've had that happen a couple times. You correct mitochondria, you may be able to back off the reverse you may reverse back off the armor thyroid, because you're trying to push gas on an engine. You're trying to put rocket fuel into a Volkswagen and expecting to get the performance of a Ferrari. It's not going to work. You have to have enough cylinders for that rocket fuel to be able to be effective. And when you're pushing T3 in and you're not going nowhere, your body's trying to tell you something. Okay? You've got a huge engine with 500 horsepower, but your transmission and rear end can't handle the torque. So basically what happens is you short circuit, or you blow the transmission, or you blow the rear end. Okay? The major factor would be the engine is the mitochondria. The thyroid and the adrenals are actually the transmission and the rear end. So sometimes you have to look at the entire picture in order to know what's going on. I'm looking to see if there's any questions here. Let's see here. What is your opinion on taking T3 in a single dosage at nighttime? Again, if you have more, I just saw this with Mike McAfee in one of his cases. We saw super high cortisol levels at nighttime. One of the recommendations I did was provide the thyroid support at nighttime. Actually may be able to burn off that excessive thyroid to where a person may be able to sleep. That's one possibility. You have to find out what works best for you. especially when you're taking thyroid meds, you've got to watch a lot of the interaction of the other supplements you're taking. They could make a major impact on that. A lot of people use the T3 circadian pattern, which is okay. It keeps the plasma levels, it keeps the peaks lower and troughs higher, which is completely fine. And it does reduce a lot of stress on the thyroid. When it comes to T3, I don't like to push the T3 above like 15 micrograms recommended through doctors, because I think that there's a negative feedback loop, especially on SHBG. How many women have started thyroid medicines and have noticed that their sex hormones or their sex drive and their libido goes to total trash? If you look in scientific studies, T3 has a huge impact on sex hormone binding globulin, and sex hormone binding globulin goes up in a lot of people that use T3. And again, when you're looking at thyroid parameters and stuff, doctors are not checking this, and you get females with low libido and you see their sex hormone binding globulin super high. You know that they're on a good dosage of either armor thyroid can cause it. So surprisingly, T4 only doesn't cause it. I see it more often with T3 that studies are done. So that's something that your endocrinologists are not checking with. I have seen multiple cases of hormone issues from females in the UK, and not one of them checked sex hormone binding globulin. Yes, you may have good total testosterone, a high total testosterone, but that doesn't matter if your SHBG is sky high. Sometimes women may need 100 testosterone to get the effect of a person that gets 30, because it's all bound up and unusable by the body. I have high T3 and low T3 and adrenal potential. I take Adrenal, blah, and it's 9. Is there anything else I should do? First of all, if you have adrenal insufficiency, you need to identify it first. Okay. The thing is you're on thyroid. Where are your markers? All right. In this type of case, what I would do a 4-point cortisol saliva test, or combination of the precision hormone test to do to do the complete hormone profile. This way, you'll look at the cellular thyroid to look to see if there's any kind of functional thyroid deficiency, as well as it may give you reasons of why your adrenals may be off. In order to correct adrenals, you have to understand the way you correct adrenals is you have to recharge your battery at nighttime. Okay? Sleep hygiene is the number one thing that recharges your adrenals. Same thing with your T4, T3. Low melatonin can cause T4, T3 conversion, and low melatonin can also cause problems with zinc metabolism. There are studies that are in PubMed showing that melatonin deficiency decrease zinc absorption in the intestinal tract. So proper sleep is major in cases. So you would have to work on sleep hygiene in order to accomplish that, because the analogy I use, when you go to bed, you put your cell phone on charge. When you wake up, it says 100%. When you go to bed, you put your body on charge, it's waking up 10 or 15%. And when you have that 10 or 15%, what happens is the person's usually running on adrenaline, and this is where the anxiousness comes in. Once you address the adrenal glands properly, then what happens is you actually disengage the epinephrine, norepinephrine part of the adrenal glands, because it can relax because it's got cortisol. Remember, cortisol is your primary fuel, adrenaline is your backup fuel. Okay? You don't want to be running on your secondaries, you want to be running on your primaries. Because if you're running on your secondaries, what happens is when you don't have cortisol issues, when you don't have enough cortisol, you don't have enough firemen to the fire. And people dealing with Lyme and stuff have a major fire going on in the body. But unfortunately, endocrinologists and generalized practitioners are not identifying the cause, because they're not addressing the adrenals properly, to where you got to bring more firemen to the fire. Because if you don't have enough firemen to the fire, that fire is going to burn out of control. And we know that, if there's not enough firemen there, those firemen that are fighting the fire, they're going to have to go on fight or flight mode until their people arrive. And unfortunately, sometimes, in many cases with Lyme, your help never arrives. And eventually, those guys get tired and they fizzle out. And eventually, when you don't have no cortisol, no more fight left into you, your body just goes into complete shutdown mode. And reverse T3 is, like I said, it's a protective mechanism put by a body. But Why would you want to disengage something that's going to help us? That doesn't make sense at all. That's why when I work with people with reverse T3, I spoke to a very prestigious clinic in London, and they had the same philosophy, in that you don't treat the thyroid right away. You try to find out why the body is downregulating its metabolism as a protective mechanism. There's a paper called the cell danger response, and it's crucial because doctors are pushing the gas pedal when your body's trying to say, no, I don't want that. So when you have high reverse T3, you got to find out why. Yes, Lyme can cause reverse T3 issues, but again, in order to heal from Lyme, your body has to go in conservation mode. You don't want to push the foot on the gas pedal when there's not a braking system in place. Otherwise, something's not going to work properly. So, Gene, I hope that answered your question. What can you do to prevent the conversion to T4 to T3? Actually, you want to prevent the conversion from free T4 to reverse T3. Okay. Yes, stress in general will cause this. So cortisol imbalances, adrenal imbalances, insulin imbalances. Again, the underlying pathology needs to be based with the skill of the practitioner to find out the reason why. Mineral deficiencies, heavy metals, pathogens, emotional stress, stress in general, structural stress. So if you have your back's out of alignment, your system's out of structural imbalances, that all can cause it. Okay, kidney issues can cause it. Diabetes can cause it. There's so many factors that can cause free T3 to free T4. Again, look at the underlying pathology. Be the best thing. If the natural thyroid is pushed up morning temperature, on average, when the weight is slightly faster, has the energy increased? You have to understand when you're dealing with thyroid, it's a governor. It controls a lot of different things. Okay. Do understand that when you're dealing with thermodynamics of the body or thermogenesis of the body, there's over 1,000 different mechanisms by which body heat and temperature all can rise. So a lot of times people have low thyroid and they actually have normal temperatures because your adrenaline's pumping and also norepinephrine, epinephrine's kicking. So your thermogenesis may be elevated at first or be normal. Then as the adrenals tend to fizzle out, your body temperature will drop. So when dealing with thyroid, one of the things is as you get to where optimum dosages are, your body's ability to tolerate heat and cold, more so heat than anything, will change. I remember when I had my thyroid issue that I was wearing sweaters out in Arizona, which was 120 degrees. So obviously there's definitely something wrong there. Does a ketogenic provide, with a ketogenic diet, there's a lot of controversy about that. I think there's multiple factors that need to be checked before people go on ketogenic diets to make sure they're in a condition, make sure that they're in a situation, environment to where it doesn't affect the thyroid. So again, it really depends upon the factors, the minerals, the nutrients, the cofactors involved before you go on a ketogenic diet. So that's a very, very tough question. But technically, if you look at the data, low carbs do cause a decrease from free T4 to free T3 and higher reverse T3s. This is why a lot of people may be on a ketogenic diet. When they're trying to lose weight and stuff, they'll add some thyroid T3. Again, you're disengaging a natural protective mechanism. But the downside of that is they usually if they decide to come off the ketogenic diet and they're on thyroid meds, they will have a nasty rebound effect where I've seen people gain 40 to 50 pounds in a matter of 6 to 8 weeks. So it's something that you do want to monitor. You do want to work with a practitioner who understands ketogenic diets, and you just want to make sure that that practitioner does a preliminary check on your minerals, cofactors, to make sure the fat metabolism is working properly. Because you don't want to go into a ketogenic diet being biotin deficient. You're going to end up with a fatty liver. because you need biotin to metabolize the fats. Carnitine is also something that you need to be aware of when going into a ketogenic diet, because a lot of the times carnitine will be eventually deficient. So if you're carnitine deficient going into a ketogenic diet, your biotin going into a ketogenic diet, then what you're doing is you're putting your liver at a high risk for inflammation. Can you recommend on recent thyroid test? TSH19, first of all, everything looks good. Only thing is your T3 is a little bit on the low side. Again, you have to look at symptomology. Everybody's sweet point or everybody's biological set point is completely different. Thyroid peroxidase is 123. That's extremely high. I would look at this as a potential Hashimoto's case, to where I would probably remove gluten, soy, dairy, remove any kind of offending foods. I would also look at the underlying mechanisms of why those antibodies are high. I'm finding high antibodies in Lyme. I'm finding high antibodies in mold. Heavy metals are another one. But if you're not doing gluten-free, gluten, dairy, and soy, it would be highly suggested to remove those out of your diet. I would definitely do a mineral test to make sure that your selenium levels are up to par, because a lot of times you look in scientific research, the selenium levels would be an optimal. Selenium levels are a huge component to Hashimoto's. Another factor is if you're on thyroid meds, your TSH is too high. The TSH has to be suppressed in order to lower the antibodies. If the antibodies get really, really high, a lot of doctors may use LDN, but you're not at the stage where they're at that high. LDN is usually used in cases where the antibodies are above like 600 or more. So again, you need to have more data on are you being treated for thyroid, what your living style's like, what your eating patterns like, are you being exposed to mold, is there a possibility of Lyme? If you have Lyme, sometimes correcting the Lyme, I've seen correct the Hashimoto's. So it's just there's just this immune system dysregulation going on, and you need to work with a trained practitioner in order to find out what the underlying pathology is. Even Candida, I've had people that actually had Candida inside their thyroid, and when you apply a little bit of black seed cumin oil, I've actually seen antibodies come down, because you're reducing the source of inflammation. You're reducing it at the source, which is the thyroid. And Candida does not just resolve within the gut; it can resolve anywhere in the body, and it loves thyroid. It loves thyroid glands. So normally in this situation, I usually have my clients, rub a little bit of black seed cumin oil on their thyroid, and retest their antibodies in say 4 or 5 weeks. If you're going to use black seed cumin oil, you definitely want to use it before 6 o'clock, because it can be stimulating. So that's one area that I would look. Diet would be another one. Again, history will dictate on which way you go. Taking RP5 for adrenals. RP5 is, I'm probably saying that's riboflavin 5-phosphate. First of all, riboflavin 5-phosphate is used for people, anybody who's on armor thyroid, who has a low T4 and high T3, needs to be on riboflavin 5-phosphate, because if your T4 is down, you're not converting B2 to FAD, which is crucial for mitochondrial function. So people that are on thyroid meds, that are on T3 only, armor thyroid, NT-thyroid, suggested to take that, because you're actually shooting yourself in the foot, because you're shutting down potentially shutting down your mitochondria. Dosage-wise, again, it depends. You got to monitor your ability to absorb, your requirements. But riboflavin 5-phosphate is one of those more safe or more benign ones. If you're using riboflavin 5-phosphate, it's one of the factors that regulates conversion, keeps glutathione moving in its proper metabolism state, which is fantastic. Selenium is another one. So if you're doing riboflavin 5-phosphate, most people that I work with thyroid, I usually have them eat 2 or 3 Brazil nuts a day. It gives you a good source of natural selenium, which your body tends to assimilate better. And what I'll do is I'll remeasure their serum levels of selenium, or the whole blood cell or plasma levels, probably within about 4 to 6 weeks, just to make sure everything's going good. So yeah, taking riboflavin 5-phosphate is definitely good. I wouldn't say it's for adrenal issues. It's more for mitochondrial issues. It's more for people that are on thyroid support, and it's also more for keeping the oxidized glutathione in its keeping glutathione in its reduced form versus its oxidized form. I have bottom range cortisol level, elevated free T3. Okay, if you have bottom end cortisol levels and you have elevated free T3s, again, this is a prime example of what we call pulling. Okay, I don't know what kind of meds you're on. Um, you're very intolerant to progesterone. Yes. If you do an organic acid test, I can pretty much guarantee you what's happening is if you have candida, yeast, or any kind of fungal issues, giving progesterone only fuels the fire. Okay, it increases the pro-inflammatory cytokines, especially when candida or yeast are present. So in that situation, and what I would do is I would look at the organic acid test by biolabs, have it properly interpreted, and look at the potential of why that's occurring. Also, when you start supplementation of progesterone, if you've been low for a long time, it actually will resensitize the estrogen receptors, and sometimes you may have to just push through. Your age and what type of progesterone dictates the type of progesterone. The symptoms will dictate the type of progesterone that you give. For example, if you're a person who has more likely to have sleep issues, I tend to use more oral form. If you tend to have vaginal issues, I'll tend to use transvaginal form. And all these are available over the counter, so you need to work with a skilled practitioner in order to know what to do with these. Progesterone, again, it can fuel the pro-inflammatory cytokines. So you need to look downstream before putting fuel in the fire. So that's another thing. And if you are having problems with the progesterone, again, you need proper evaluation. Saliva is not a proper evaluation because you don't know where the progesterone is going. Sometimes progesterone can actually increase estrogen. Sometimes progesterone can increase DHEA. Sometimes it can increase aldosterone. It can go in any kind of direction. So proper evaluation would be highly suggested. How would you spot thyroid issues in organic acid test? One of the things I look for is succinic. If succinic is out of balance or succinic is out of balance, that is usually an indication of FAD deficiency, which would mean that there's potential thyroid issues involved. You can also look at 35. 35 is a representation. If 35 is high or out of balance, I'd be looking at low cortisol levels because you need cortisol to convert dopamine to epinephrine, dopamine to norepinephrine. So those are the two major factors I would look for. It's 24 and 35 would be indication of potential thyroid issues. High Lodokar, CoT, high T4. Again, with Elizabeth, without full data, the TPO, TGABs, and the free T3 levels, it's not enough information. Your TSH could be normal, suppressed. I don't know if you're on thyroid meds. If you're high T4, when are you taking your thyroid meds? If you are taking thyroid meds, are you taking thyroid meds before the blood test and testing what's in the blood? Thyroid testing should be done on the morning. You're supposed to take the thyroid, but you don't take the thyroid before going to the test. And this is where a lot of people are getting stuck at because their endocrinologist is not telling them. So they're taking their anti-thyroid, they're coming back, and they're coming back with normal levels. But when you actually stop the medicine before taking the blood test in the morning, and basically you just get up and go take the test without taking your thyroid meds, you'll see a totally different picture. I see this a lot in thyroid cases because of the fact is people are not told this, and you're actually clinically in the blood normal, but you're totally subclinical hypothyroidism, and this is where the precision hormone test comes in at, because I can look at this information and I can say, okay, you're on thyroid meds. When did you? You're looking hypothyroid here. When are you taking labs in relationship to taking your meds? And a lot of them, they'll get up in the morning, 6 o'clock, take the thyroid meds, they'll go get the blood work 8 o'clock. And all you're measuring is you're measuring your peak. And that's not what you want to measure. You want to measure your trough. Okay? If T3 is not getting inside the cell, again, cortisol, ferritin are the main issues. I know a lot of people with Lyme have low ferritin levels, so I would definitely look at optimizing cortisol. I would also look at optimizing mitochondria. Again, you can pull rocket fuel into a Volkswagen and don't expect to have the performance of a Ferrari. So you can pour T3 into the body, but if your engine is only a 4-cylinder because the mitochondria aren't working, sometimes there may be indications that there might be mitochondrial dysfunction going on, and you're trying to push something that's not supposed to happen. So in that situation, I would probably look at mitochondria as well as factors that are blocking the thyroid receptor, which would be your progesterone, estrogen, heavy metals. Viruses can also cause dysregulation, as well as optimizing your cortisol levels would be the best thing. If I have sufficient cortisol but under stress, but current to respond, okay, number one thing is if your body's under stress, you don't want to see normal cortisol levels. That's the biggest mistake practitioners make, okay? That's like having a major forest fire and just calling 4 companies when actually have 10, all right? When you're looking at cortisol levels, you need to take in consideration how much inflammation the person's under, okay? I'd rather see a person with high cortisol levels, knowing that the person has the capacity to respond to the stress, especially if you're dealing with Lyme. A lot of people I've seen people with normal cortisol levels smack in the mid-range, and when you address the adrenals and give them a little bit of boost, their symptoms actually get better because they don't have enough reserve to deal with their daily functions, along with the inflammation caused by the infections and other factors that are present. So don't be deceived by being in the normal range, okay? Practitioners are being misled by that, and they need to understand that. So when I educate doctors or when I educate practitioners, I always make sure, yes, they may be in the normal range, but they're totally symptomatic. Steve, it always comes back to 3 factors. It comes back to pathogens, environmental toxins, or it comes to emotional stress, okay? PTSD. If you, as a practitioner, look at those 3 factors, you'll be able to identify where 90% of the stress comes from. And once you take those 3 into considerations, that's where the detective work begins, to where you have to work with a trained practitioner to look at those things. Then you get the data from the labs to support. Is it a pathogen? Is it an environmental toxin? Because a lot of times people in UK, I'm finding, are majority the mold's triggering the Lyme because of the places you live in. Okay, you guys live in a human petri dish, basically. It's damp pretty much all the time. You live in a lot of old buildings and mansions. So the first thing I look at it is, and we're finding out that when you're treating now through Klinghardt, and not just Klinghardt, but other people, we're starting to look at parasites first. We're looking at mold, parasites, and then Lyme. But again, you have to look at the data to see which one of those 3 is screaming the loudest, because they can cross-reference. So that's where diagnostic testing is crucial, to be able to isolate where the variable may be. And that's where the trick comes with practitioners, is learning how to properly interpret it, listen to their client or patient, because they will tell them where the problem is. The problem is doctors don't have the time to do that. And our consultation is not long enough. I mean, 3/4 of my consultations last anywhere between 2 to 3 hours, are focused upon history. And not just your history, your parents' history, where you used to live. So you have to look at all those variables. And and a lot of it is cultural diversity too, because back in the 1970s and 80s, it wasn't common for pregnant women to drink a lot of beer. Sometimes because it was socially acceptable. Now a lot of those people and stuff were having alcohol problems because of the gene expression on the alcohol dehydrogenase and also the aldehydes. Again, high T4, your T4 is not converting T3. Again, you're not getting accurate information. The best place to go to get labs done is TDL labs. They do free T3, free T4, TPO, TGAB. They have it on a thyroid panel, number 2, I believe it is, that I highly recommend getting. It's actually very affordable. and you can work with a practitioner in order to find out that information. Let's see here. No thyroid meds. Atrial fibrillation, again, a lot of times Lyme can cause that, but a lot of times magnesium deficiency. So again, you want to check your red blood cell magnesium levels. When you all look at it and stuff, it all goes back to enzymes. What drives enzymes? Cofactors. Cofactors are your nutrients, your proteins. It's your amino acids, your fats, your minerals and vitamins, your air, the water, the environment you live in, your thoughts, sleep hygiene. It all comes back to the basics. And this is what's not being addressed a lot in the clients and cases that I'm seeing. The simple stuff is being heavily overlooked, and it can make a world of a difference in people's health. Just changing the water you drink. I mean, if you're drinking out of plastic bottles and stuff, even though the tap water, a lot of you guys have fluoridation in your water too, which is messing up the thyroid, because you need iodine. Now, since you got fluoridation in your water, next thing you know, you're going to Celtic sea salt, so you're putting your body into an iodine deficiency, not realizing it, trying to do things that are healthy. How do you treat parasites? Parasites are one of the hardest things to treat. A lot of doctors are using anemia to hit it really hard. You can use herbals. But the first thing you got to do is you got to make sure the immune system's ready for it. Because if the immune system's not ready for it, what happens is you can overstimulate the immune system. Even I had people that were using the Rife machine that I knew Lyme was present, but it was in its dormant state. They did the Rife on the full moon, which I told them not to do, and next thing you know, Lyme came out full bore. So you have to be careful when you're treating things, just because of the fact of one thing can trigger a chain reaction. Again, when you're treating mold, parasites, it's a very complex situation. The first thing you want to do is you want to remove yourself out of this. You want to remove yourself from the environment. It's the first thing. You remove yourself and your loved ones from the environment if possible. There are different things you can use. There's different air machines. There's high-tech air filters you can use. I think now Oliver has a guy who can come out to do the mold as well. So there's different things you can do. The first thing is you need to identify the problem, and you do that with clinical testing would be the highly suggested job. Long-term use of magnesium in filtered water. Long-term use of magnesium, again, you're taking magnesium, but are you getting inside your cell? Okay? Just because you're taking magnesium doesn't mean you're getting inside. So if you're using magnesium, especially when you have thyroid problems and everything else, if you have oxalate problems, magnesium is not going to absorb because the oxalates form a soap in your digestive tract, which will bind the magnesium and calcium together, actually cause mineral deficiencies. So I usually use transdermal magnesium with people. Tends to go around the gut. Whenever I can, I tend to go around the gut as much as I can in order to get maximum absorption for the people. Like I said, mitochondrial function is one of those things we're just starting to get and deal with. Sometimes you heal the mitochondria and you got to heal the cells. A lot of times, if you have altered cell membrane permeability because you have altered omega-6 to 3 to 9 ratio, low arachidonic acid to a lot of people are taking fish oils, which I don't like. 90% of the people that I'm testing through the red blood cell analysis from the biolabs is having altered arachidonic acid to EPA ratio, which means basically you're losing your traffic cops to direct traffic to who comes in and goes outside the cell, which like sends it makes me cringe. So proper cell membrane stability would be one of the first things you want to definitely look for. And again, I recommend the biolabs fatty acid profile. It's very good, very affordable, provides a lot of information, because if you don't stabilize the cell membrane, no matter what you do, it's not going to matter. You're not going to heal. There's a saying, you're only healthy as your cell membranes are. And a lot of people's cell membranes are deteriorating because a lot of the times the infections, mold, Lyme, heavy metals, will cause an increase of LPPLA2, which causes your cell membrane to deteriorate. And when it deteriorates, what it does is it has all the lipids that's supposed to be nicely packaged in here are coming out. And that cell that should be like jello is more like water, and communication is either hyperactive or or the um, the communication is just being not at the right speed. So it's more of a short circuit. So what I tend to do is I tend to go into the cellular membrane, look at the gap junctions, close up those gap junctions, work on the the communication of the cells, work on creating the cellular. You got to shorten your system. What AFib is, and once you correct the cell membrane, often you will correct a lot of the problems downstream. What can be addressed, can be done to make cortisol higher other than taking depending on if cortisol wise, again, are you burning it down too fast because you're taking too much thyroid? You can also use licorice root. Licorice root, you just got to watch because it is highly estrogenic. So you just got to be careful. You got to look at potassium levels too, because you're taking licorice root. It will lower your potassium levels and increase your sodium levels, which is desirable in that situation. If your antibodies are high enough, absolutely, you could have recurrent infection. But first of all, if you're dealing with anything mold, you always want to identify it by having some type of identification through ERMI testing, or you can get the plates and seal off the room and have it grow to see if there's any kind of culture there. Is there any other questions? Well, we got about 5 minutes, so the copper dysregulation theory. First of all, number one is copper dysregulation happens in progesterone estrogen. You correct the progesterone estrogen, a lot of times the copper zinc corrects itself. The first thing I look in, either when I look at copper zinc imbalance, if the copper's high, zinc level's low in female, I know there's a progesterone deficiency going on. I do a precision hormone test to verify that. Correcting the progesterone and correcting estrogen can help a lot in a lot of avenues, because progesterone, estrogen is crucial for proper cell membrane function. Without estrogen, you actually don't synthesize phosphatidylcholine. So dehydrated. 90% of the world's cells are dehydrated in the first place. Okay, you can drink water until your cows come home, but if you don't have proper abilities to handle it, that's because what's happening is it's not holding. So the cells are leaking. So my theory is and my statement is, leaky cells lead to leaky gut, lead to leaky brain. Okay, you have to fix the cell membrane sometimes to fix the gut, because if you don't close the gap junctions, you're never going to close the brain and also the gut junctions either. For 23andMe, it doesn't matter. As long as you get the raw data and run it through MTHFR support, that's what I tend to use. People know that when it comes to genetics and stuff, I can pull out information that they had no clue with. I don't even need the genetics anymore, because you just know what people's gene expressions are. And I'd rather have people put that money towards something to show the actual expressions itself. I mean, for the same price that you can do at a consultation with a practitioner, with a 23andMe, you could have an organic acid test. You could have a precision hormone test, okay, for the same price. And I get more information out of that, because that tells me which genes are expressing. I can see Lyme. I can see how your Lyme treatment's going through the organic acid test, through the precision hormone test. And that what makes very unique. It's about that time, wrapping up right now. If you guys are interested in making an appointment, my email is info@matrixhealthwell.com. It's been a pleasure speaking with you again. Hope this was educational and informative, gave you a lot of things to think about. And if you have anything, if you have open-minded endocrinologists who's willing to work, I would be glad to work with them in your case, because I think there needs to be more information shared over in other countries about endocrinology, because I think endocrinology is one of those avenues that is just in its dark ages. Um, and we want to try to help educate endocrinologists who's willing to listen, first of all. I notice I'm getting a lot of resistance in certain countries. So I hope this was good for you, and it's been a pleasure speaking with you as always, and looking forward to our next chat. Have a great day.